On the 17th of October, 1997, at exactly 11:12 p.m., deep within the frozen, unforgiving wilderness of the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, a young man named David was staring at a waterlogged, plastic-covered spiral notebook. The beam of his heavy flashlight was trembling so violently that the light bounced erratically off the rotting wooden walls of the small, isolated trail shelter. David wasn't shivering from the freezing mountain air, nor from the damp chill of the torrential storm raging outside. He was shivering because of what was written on the wet, stained page in front of him. The handwriting was fresh, written in dark, jagged ink. It described, with absolute, terrifying precision, every single thing that David and his friend Mark had done over the last 72 hours. It knew what they ate, it knew when they rested, and it knew secrets they hadn't even spoken out loud. But it was the very last line of the entry, dated today, October 17th, that made the air turn completely to ice. The line read, 11:12 p.m. They are reading my diary right now. I am standing just outside the broken window, watching them. David, slowly, paralyzingly, turned his head toward the pitch-black window frame across the shelter. He glanced down at the digital glow of his wristwatch. It read exactly 11:12 p.m. To truly understand how David and Mark ended up trapped in that wooden room, listening to the suffocating silence of the forest, we have to go back 3 days. David and Mark were not reckless, casual hikers. They were experienced backpackers who had spent years conquering difficult sections of the Appalachian Trail. They prided themselves on their preparation. For this specific mid-October trip, they had chosen a remote, rarely traveled loop deep within the Pisgah wilderness, wanting to challenge themselves away from the usual tourist crowds. They carried top-of-the-line gear, heavy Osprey internal frame packs loaded with a week's worth of rations, a reliable Coleman camping stove, specialized thermal layers, and a brand new Garmin GPS unit. On the morning of October 15th, the weather forecast had promised clear, crisp autumn skies. But the mountains have a dangerous mind of their own. By the afternoon of their second day, a massive, unpredicted low-pressure system slammed into the region, bringing with it torrential, blinding rain and a fog so incredibly thick that visibility was reduced to less than 5 feet. The temperature plummeted. Under the dense, soaking canopy of the ancient trees, their Garmin GPS completely lost its satellite connection. Every direction looked identical. The steep ridges bled into deep, dark ravines, and by late afternoon on October 17th, they realized they were completely off trail. They were soaking wet, exhausted, and hypothermia was fast becoming a very real, life-threatening danger. Just as despair was starting to settle in, Mark spotted something through the gray sheets of heavy rain. It was a crude, primitive structure tucked away under a jagged rock overhang. It was an old, unmapped trail shelter made of decaying oak logs, known locally to only a few park rangers as Shelter Number 4. It was falling apart, but to the freezing hikers, it looked like a sanctuary. The shelter was basic. It had 3 wooden walls, a dirt floor, a broken glass window, and a single long wooden bench cutting across the back wall. Grateful to finally escape the relentless downpour, they dropped their heavy, waterlogged backpacks. Mark immediately knelt on the dirt floor, his hands shaking as he tried to spark their portable Coleman stove to get some heat. David, meanwhile, decided to use his heavy maglite flashlight to check the dark perimeter of the shelter for spiders or wild animals. As the powerful beam of light swept across the dirt floor and passed underneath the rotting wooden bench, something unusual caught David's eye. Hidden in the shadows, partially buried in the loose mud, was a cheap, plastic-covered spiral notebook. It looked damp, but completely intact. David assumed it was just a standard trail log, a notebook where passing hikers leave their names, the date, and a friendly message for the next travelers. He picked it up, brushed off the wet dirt, and flipped it open, hoping to find some comfort in the words of people who had been here before them. But this wasn't a trail log. The very first entry was dated October 15th, the exact day David and Mark had taken their first steps into the forest. The entry read, 2 of them, one in a blue Columbia jacket, one in yellow. They entered through the north gate at 0800 hours. The one in yellow carries a slight limp. "I will follow them." David choked back a breath, his throat suddenly tight. Mark was wearing a bright yellow rain jacket, and on their very first mile of the trek, Mark had twisted his ankle on a wet root, causing him to limp for the rest of the day. With his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs, David frantically flipped to the next page. The entry was dated October 16th. They camped by the Eastern Creek tonight. The blue jacket forgot to lock his bear canister properly. I took 2 cans of beef stew while they slept in their tent. They didn't even wake up when I stepped over their rainfly. David remembered that morning clearly. Mark had noticed that 2 cans of their stew were missing from the supplies, but they had simply assumed they had miscounted back at the car. Now, staring at the page, the horrifying reality crashed down on David. This wasn't a forgotten notebook. Someone, some entity or person, had been walking silently behind them in the pitch black, tracking their every footstep, watching them sleep for 3 straight days. David's hands shook so violently the notebook almost slipped from his fingers. In a low, terrified whisper, he called out to his friend, "Mark, you need to look at this right now." Mark crawled over, his face pale under the flashlight's glare. As his eyes scanned the jagged handwriting, the remaining color drained from his face. They read through the entries together, watching their own nightmare detail through the eyes of an invisible stalker. And then they reached the final entry. The one marked October 17th, written with fresh ink that looked like it hadn't even fully dried. 11:12 p.m. They are reading my diary right now. I am standing just outside the broken window, watching them. Right at that exact second, from the absolute darkness just outside the broken glass window, less than 3 feet away from where David was sitting, a sound broke through the noise of the storm. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rain. It was the distinct, crisp, unmistakable sound of a heavy, metallic jacket, zipper, slowly being pulled down. And then, right through the open window frame, came the sound of a low, wet, ragged breath. David didn't look up to see what was standing there. Survival instinct, pure and primal, took over his entire body. He grabbed Mark by the arm, dropped the notebook into the mud, and they bolted out of the shelter's open front, leaping directly into the freezing, chaotic storm. They left everything behind: their expensive backpacks, their food, their shelter, their warmth. They ran blindly through the pitch-black woods, their flashlights cutting uselessly through the thick fog. They fell over jagged rocks, tore their clothes on sharp briars, and moved purely on adrenaline. fully believing that if they stopped for even a single second, whatever was behind them would catch them. Miraculously, after 2 hours of running through the dark, they stumbled onto a paved logging road and managed to flag down a passing park ranger vehicle. The next morning, the North Carolina State Police, alongside search and rescue teams, returned to shelter number 4. They found David and Mark's untouched backpacks exactly where they had dropped them, and they found the plastic-covered spiral notebook lying on the dirt floor, soaked in rain. But when the forensic crime lab analyzed the evidence, the case took a deeply disturbing turn that left investigators completely baffled. The physical paper, the plastic spiral binding, and the chemical composition of the ink were meticulously tested. The lab concluded, without a shadow of a doubt, that the notebook and the ink used to write those terrifying entries had been manufactured in the early 1940s. The paper had aged naturally over a span of 50 years. Yet, the entries perfectly detailed modern 1,997 clothing brands, specific high-tech hiking gear, and the exact names of 2 boys who hadn't even been born when that paper was made. Furthermore, despite the torrential rain that had turned the ground around the shelter into a thick bed of mud, police found absolutely no footprints outside the broken window. There were no tracks leading to the shelter, and no tracks leaving it, despite the fact that David and Mark had clearly heard someone standing there. Who or what was tracking those 2 boys through the Pisgah National Forest? Was it a flesh and blood stalker using vintage materials to throw off the police? Or had David and Mark stumbled into a terrifying, localized tear in time itself? To this day, the mysterious case of shelter number 4 remains one of America's most chilling, unsolved wilderness anomalies. In the freezing winter of 1992, on a desolate, forgotten stretch of Route 66, a 19-year-old gas station attendant named Tom witnessed something that the human mind is simply not equipped to comprehend. To this day, the official police files in Quay County, New Mexico, contain a report from that night that has never been resolved. A report that suggests that sometimes the past doesn't stay dead. It just waits on the side of the highway. Glen Rio was once a bustling, vibrant town, sitting right on the border of Texas and New Mexico. It was a place where thousands of travelers stopped every single day to refuel, eat, and rest as they drove across the American West. But by the time 1992 arrived, a newly constructed interstate bypass completely isolated the town. Within a few short years, Glen Rio became a ghost town. The businesses shut down, the residents packed up and left, and population dropped to 0. The only remaining sign of life was a lone, 24-hour Texaco gas station and convenience store. Tom worked the graveyard shift there to save money for his college tuition. It was a mind-numbing, incredibly lonely job. Hours would pass without a single pair of headlights appearing on the dark horizon. November 12th was an exceptionally cold night. The desert air was biting, and a bitter wind constantly shook the large glass windows of the storefront. Tom sat behind the counter, wrapped in a heavy jacket, trying his best to stay awake by listening to the static-filled hum of an old AM radio playing faint country music. At exactly 2:14 a.m., the radio static suddenly grew incredibly loud, drowning out the music entirely. Before Tom could reach over to turn the dial, a sudden flash of bright headlights cut through the thick frost on the front windows. A car had pulled up to pump number 2. Tom was surprised But what really caught his attention was the vehicle itself. It was a pristine, flawless 1974 Ford Gran Torino. The paint was a deep, glossy red with a white stripe, looking as though it had just rolled off the factory showroom floor. There wasn't a single speck of desert dust on the chrome bumpers, and no mud on the tires, despite the wild storm outside. Tom watched from behind the counter as the driver's side door swung open. A man stepped out into the freezing wind. He didn't seem to care about the cold at all. He walked with a relaxed, confident stride toward the convenience store entrance. When he pushed the door open, the little bell above the frame didn't ring, but a sudden, unnatural wave of cold air swept into the building. As the man walked closer to the counter, Tom began to feel an intense sense of unease. The traveler looked to be in his late 20s, but his entire appearance belonged to a completely different era. He was wearing faded, wide-bottom denim jeans, a thick, brown leather jacket with an oversized collar, and he had long, styled sideburns that had completely gone out of fashion nearly 20 years prior. He looked exactly like a living photograph from the mid-70s. The man stopped at the counter, pulled a wrinkled $5 bill from his pocket, laid it flat on the counter, and spoke in a tired, raspy voice. He said, "Give me a fill-up on pump 2, please. And hey, by the way, where's Donald tonight? He told me he was taking the graveyard shift." Tom froze. His heart skipped a beat, and a cold sweat broke out across his forehead. Donald was the original builder and owner of this specific Texaco station, but Donald hadn't worked a shift there in almost 2 decades. In fact, on a bitter night in November of 1974, Donald had vanished completely without a trace. He had walked out of the station to check on a customer and was never seen again, leaving his wallet, his keys, and his own car behind in the parking lot. It was one of the state's most famous cold cases. Tom swallowed hard, his voice trembling slightly as he answered, Sir, Donald hasn't owned this place in a very long time. I'm the only one who works here." The man broke into a wide, casual chuckle, shaking his head as if Tom was just pulling a prank on him. "What are you talking about, kid? I just saw Donald right here yesterday afternoon. He told me to stop by tonight." Before Tom could respond, the man tossed a rolled-up newspaper he had been carrying under his arm onto the counter. "Mind if I grab a coffee while the pump runs?" he asked, not waiting for an answer, before turning around and walking over to the self-service coffee station at the back of the store. Tom stood completely paralyzed behind the counter. His eyes slowly drifted down to the newspaper the man had left behind. It was a copy of the Texas Chronicle. But the paper wasn't yellowed, brittle, or old. It was perfectly crisp, stiff, and carried the strong, distinct smell of fresh, wet printing ink. Tom leaned in closer to look at the date printed at the top of the front page. It read, November 12th, 1974. A wave of pure terror washed over Tom. He felt an overwhelming urge to run out of the building, but his legs felt like lead. At that exact moment, he remembered the old, grainy black and white security monitor mounted on the wall directly above his head. The monitor displayed a live feed of the store's back aisles, including the coffee station. Tom slowly raised his head to look at the screen. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. On the security monitor, the coffee aisle was completely, utterly empty. There was no man standing there. There was no leather jacket, no bell-bottom jeans, and no human shape at all. But through his own bare eyes, looking directly across the room, Tom could clearly see the physical man standing right there, his back turned, adjusting a plastic lid onto a paper cup. Tom looked back up at the monitor. On the screen, the heavy glass coffee pod was slowly tilting through the air entirely on its own, pouring dark, steaming liquid into a paper cup that was floating completely unaided in the middle of the empty aisle. Tom's heart was hammering so violently against his ribs he could barely breathe. He wanted to scream, but no sound would come out of his throat. A moment later, the man finished his coffee, turned back around, and walked casually back to the counter. He picked up his change, took a slow sip from the steaming cup, and smiled warmly at Tom. "Thanks, kid. Keep the change. Have a good night," he said. He turned, pushed the front door open, and walked back out into the darkness. Tom stood frozen for nearly 30 seconds, listening to the roaring wind outside, before his survival instincts finally kicked in. He rushed around the counter, ran to the front window, and pressed his face against a cold glass, looking out at pump number 2. The 1974 Ford Gran Torino was completely gone. The entire highway, stretching miles into the dark desert in both directions, was entirely empty. There were no taillights, no sound of an engine, nothing but pitch blackness. Tom grabbed his heavy flashlight, pushed the door open, and ran out to the concrete island by the pump. The ground was bone dry, but right where the classic car had been parked, 2 fresh, deep tire tracks were pressed perfectly into the thick desert dust. Tom followed the tracks with a beam of his flashlight. The tire marks rolled forward for about 10 feet, and then, abruptly and cleanly, they stopped. They didn't fade out. They simply vanished into nothingness, as if the vehicle had taken off into the sky. Terrified and weeping from pure adrenaline, Tom ran back inside, locked the heavy security doors, and dialed the New Mexico Highway Patrol. When 2 state troopers arrived a half hour later, they found Tom huddled in the corner of the locked store, refusing to open the door until they showed their badges. Initially, the officers believed the young clerk was simply hallucinating or pulling a cruel graveyard shift prank. But then, Tom handed them the evidence left behind on the counter. First was the newspaper. It was an authentic, pristine 1974 edition of the Texas Chronicle, a publication that had gone out of business over 15 years ago. The ink was still fresh enough to smudge under a thumb. Second, when the troopers inspected the counter where the mysterious driver had paid, they found an old, cracked leather wallet that the man had accidentally left behind in his hurry. Inside the wallet was a driver's license belonging to a man named Thomas Miller. The state troopers ran the name and the old license number through the national database right from their patrol car. The dispatcher's voice came back over the radio, cold and trembling. Thomas Miller was dead. He had died on November 12, 1974. According to the old accident reports, Miller had lost control of his brand new red Ford Gran Torino on that exact stretch of Route 66, crashing into a deep, rocky ravine just 3 miles down the road from the Texaco station. The official time of death recorded by the coroner back then was exactly 2:20 a.m., just 6 minutes after Tom had watched him walk out of the convenience store. Weeks later, the security tape from the station's analog recorder was seized and reviewed by investigators. The footage confirmed Tom's terrifying story. The video showed Tom standing behind the counter, talking and reacting to empty space. It showed a $5 bill sliding across the counter completely on its own, and a paper cup lifting from the stack, floating to the machine, and filling with coffee without a single human hand touching it. Tom had experienced a pure, undeniable time slip. A brief, terrifying anomaly where a dying highway allowed the past and the present to collide, forcing a lonely teenager to serve coffee to a man who had been dead for nearly 20 years. In the early months of 2024, a young, highly successful tech couple named Liam and Sarah believed they had successfully secured their ultimate dream home in Palo Alto, California, the wealthy, high-tech heart of Silicon Valley. It was a stunning, mid-century modern luxury home built from sleek glass, polished concrete, and rich redwood. The property was a foreclosure, sold by the bank at a staggering 40% below its actual market value, because the previous owner, a brilliant but notoriously reclusive software developer, had abruptly abandoned it and vanished off the grid. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, but its true selling point was that it was entirely integrated with an advanced, custom-built artificial intelligence smart home system that controlled every single aspect of the property. But within 3 short weeks of moving in, Liam and Sarah's modern sanctuary transformed into a waking, inescapable nightmare. The house appeared to become violently possessed by a malicious, intelligent poltergeist. The smart speakers would broadcast terrifying, distorted messages in the dead of night. The central air system would plummet the indoor temperature to freezing levels in a matter of seconds, and heavy porcelain dishes would slam onto the kitchen floor when nobody was in the room. Liam and Sarah were rational, scientific engineers who didn't believe in the supernatural, but the house was driving them to the brink of absolute madness. When federal agents finally launched a midnight raid on the property, they uncovered a dark, mechanical truth that was far more terrifying than any ghost story. The monster torturing them wasn't a spirit from the past. It was a living human being, silently watching their every move from inside the very walls they slept in. To understand the sheer terror that took over their lives, you have to understand how deeply integrated the house was with technology. Liam and Sarah were both senior software engineers at a major tech firm, so when they saw the automated property, they felt completely at home. The entire house operated on a centralized server located in the basement. Every single lock was biometric or digital. The blinds opened and closed automatically based on the position of the sun, and dozens of high-definition security cameras were seamlessly embedded into the ceilings and walls, hidden behind smoke detectors and light fixtures. The entire property could be monitored and controlled from a single custom application on their smartphones. The strange anomalies began just 5 days after they unpacked their boxes. It started with small, easily dismissible technical glitches. Sarah would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning shivering uncontrollably, only to find that the central heating system had been manually overridden, dropping the master bedroom's temperature to a freezing 40 degrees Fahrenheit. When Liam woke up to check the system diagnostics and the data logs, the software simply showed a generic system glitch. He reset the main server, assuming it was just a remnant of old, unoptimized code left behind by the previous owner. But by the second week, the escalation became aggressive, calculated, and terrifying. The living room television, connected to the central media matrix, would violently turn on at maximum volume in the middle of the night, blasting horrific, deafening white noise static through the house. Heavy glass doors would unlatch and slide open on their own, letting the cold night air inside. One afternoon, while Sarah was working from home in the upstairs office. She heard a loud, violent crash from the kitchen downstairs. She rushed down to find that an entire stack of heavy ceramic dinner plates had been pulled from the cabinets and smashed across the marble floor. There were no earthquakes, no heavy trucks driving by, and no logical explanation. Liam and Sarah tried to remain logical, but their peace of mind was completely shattered, and their smart home application began sending constant, erratic motion alerts to their phones. The system would notify them that movement was detected in the guest bedroom, the hallway, or the dining room. But when they opened the live camera feeds on their screens, the rooms were completely empty and bathed in silence. The house was beginning to feel less like a home and more like an invisible trap. The absolute breaking point occurred on a rainy Tuesday night. Liam was fast asleep beside Sarah, completely exhausted from a long week at the office. Sarah, however, was wide awake, her anxiety keeping her eyes glued to the ceiling. The house was entirely dark. Suddenly, without warning, the custom smart speaker mounted directly into the wooden headboard above their bed crackled to life with a sharp burst of digital static. From the speaker came a low, slow, distorted whisper. Sarah completely froze, her breath catching in her throat, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. The voice coming out of the speaker belonged to a woman. In fact, it was a perfect, chilling replica of Sarah's own voice. The audio file was a highly advanced digital clone of Sarah's specific vocal frequencies, mimicking her exact tone and speech patterns. The voice whispered, "Liam is fast asleep now. The back door is completely unlocked. You can come inside." Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream, violently throwing herself away from the headboard and waking Liam up in a panic. Liam scrambled to turn on the lights, but when he screamed at the smart home system to turn them on, the voice commands failed. The lights remained pitch black. Sarah, sobbing hysterically, grabbed her phone and opened the smart home interface. According to the master control panel, the speakers in the bedroom were completely powered down, and the entire system was registered as completely idle. No audio files had been played through the network, yet both of them could still hear the faint, residual hiss of the speaker amplifier in the dark room. The nightmare reached its terrifying climax the very next evening. Liam had to stay late at his office in San Francisco to handle a critical server deployment, leaving Sarah entirely alone in the massive glass house. Trying to calm her frayed nerves, Sarah locked every single digital door from her phone and decided to take a hot shower. Her smartphone was sitting face up on the marble counter next to the sink. As she was washing her hair, the distinct, synthetic chime of a high-priority smart home notification echoed through the bathroom. Sarah wiped the water from her eyes, stepped out of the shower, and picked up the phone with a trembling hand. The screen read, "Warning. Motion detected in the master bedroom." Her heart dropped into her stomach. With shaking fingers, she tapped the notification, opening the live, high-definition camera feed of their bedroom. The camera angle was positioned from the top corner of the ceiling, looking down at their king-sized bed. The room was dark, lit only by the pale moonlight filtering through the glass walls. Sarah stared at the screen, her eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror. In the live video feed, she could clearly see the bed, the closet doors, and the main entrance. But standing perfectly still, right next to Liam's side of the bed, was a tall, thin, hooded figure dressed entirely in black. The intruder was standing right where Liam usually slept, his face completely obscured by a dark hood staring directly up into the lens of the hidden security camera. He knew exactly where the camera was, and he knew Sarah was watching him right at that exact second. Sarah didn't hesitate. She locked herself inside the bathroom, turned on the faucet to create noise, and immediately dialed 911, her voice cracking as she begged the dispatcher for help. Within less than 7 minutes, 3 Palo Alto police cruisers tore up the driveway, their sirens echoing through the quiet neighborhood. The police officers kicked through the front entrance and swept the entire property with their firearms drawn. They searched the master bedroom, the closets, under the bed, and every single corner of the luxury home. But they found absolutely nothing. Every single digital window and door was still securely locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, and no footprints on the hardwood floors. To the responding officers, it seemed physically impossible for anyone to have entered or escaped the house. They subtly suggested to Liam, who had just rushed home in a panic, that perhaps the smart home application has simply suffered another severe software glitch, replaying an old video file. But Liam and Sarah were technology experts. They knew the difference between a software glitch and a targeted attack. The next morning, refusing to spend another night in the house, Liam utilized his high-level tech connections to contact a specialized federal cyber forensics unit. A team of 3 elite FBI cybercrime specialists arrived at the property with advanced network analysis hardware to inspect the physical infrastructure of the house. The federal agents spent hours downloading the raw system logs directly from the central server rack in the basement, while analyzing the local internet protocol addresses and the data routing traffic. One of the primary agents noticed an impossible anomaly. The smart home system was indeed receiving manual commands to drop the temperature, blast static, and play custom synthesized audio files. But these commands were not coming from an external hacker over the internet, nor were they coming from the official cloud servers. The commands were originating from a local, hardwired network connection hidden somewhere inside the physical layout of the property itself. The agents pulled out a signal tracing device and followed the thick bundles of Category 6 data cables behind the drywall. The wires traveled straight through the master bedroom floor, down through the walls of the kitchen, and led directly behind a massive, custom-built wooden bookshelf that covered the entire back wall of the basement. An agent stepped forward, pulling at the heavy oak shelves. As he ran his hand along the side paneling, his fingers hit a hidden mechanical latch concealed inside a hollowed-out decorative book. With a low, heavy click, the entire massive bookshelf smoothly slid forward and swung outward on hidden steel rollers, revealing a narrow, pitch-black vertical crawl space that ran entirely between the inner and outer walls of the structure. The FBI agents drew their weapons, turned on their tactical flashlights, and rushed into the hidden tunnel. The crawl space was lined with soundproofing foam and running cables. As they followed the narrow path, they realized the tunnel led directly to a secret, reinforced subterranean room constructed right underneath Liam and Sarah's master bedroom floor. When the agents kicked down the final hidden door, they found a fully operational living space hidden inside the dark concrete foundations. The secret room contained a small canvas cot, weeks' worth of garbage and discarded clothing, stacks of canned food, a high-end server rack, and 3 massive computer monitors. The monitors were completely lit up, displaying crystal clear, unedited, live video feeds from every single room in the house above, including the kitchen, the bathroom, and a direct, close-up view of Liam and Sarah's bed. Sitting in the desk chair, staring blankly at the monitors with wild, bloodshot eyes, was the previous owner of the house, the brilliant but deeply disturbed software engineer, who the bank claimed had disappeared off the face of the earth. He had never actually left. He had intentionally defaulted on his mortgage so the bank would seize the property and sell it to an unsuspecting family. Before officially walking out the front door, he had spent nearly 6 months secretly constructing this elaborate network of hidden tunnels within the double drywall system and installing powerful mechanical actuators behind the kitchen cabinets to throw dishes and create terrifying noises. He had installed a powerful local microphone network to record Sarah and Liam's daily conversations, using that audio data to train a highly sophisticated artificial intelligence voice generator to perfectly clone Sarah's vocal patterns. His twisted, highly dangerous psychological goal was to completely terrorize whoever bought his beloved home, driving them completely insane through simulated paranormal activity so they would abandon the property, allowing him to eventually buy his dream house back from the bank at an even lower, ruined price. The terrifying poltergeist of Palo Alto was entirely a fabrication of human malice and twisted technical brilliance. A disturbing reminder that in the modern era of smart homes and connected technology, the monsters haunting our houses are no longer spirits from another world. They are the people hiding behind the screens, living in our walls, and silently watching our every move.